The American economy is unraveling at a speed that has caught almost everyone off guard, and a silent, desperate migration is already underway as tens of thousands of families realize that staying put means financial ruin. We are witnessing the early stages of a mass exodus from the economic disaster zones that the coastal megacities have become. A frantic search for the last remaining pockets of the country where a collapsing dollar, a shattered supply chain, and a crippled job market won't immediately wipe you out. You can almost hear it in the drone of U-Haul engines, and see it in the for sale signs piling up in once booming suburbs from Sacramento to Long Island. According to our research, which synthesizes years of economic data, state-level debt analysis, employment trends, and cost of living forecasts, the map of the United States is being fundamentally redrawn not by politics, but by pure, unforgiving economic survival. When the full weight of this depression hits, 41 states will become poverty traps. Financial quicksand where your savings evaporate. Your property value plummets to zero, and the basic cost of existing becomes a debt sentence you can never escape. Only 9 states, just 9, possess the specific economic and geographic DNA to function as lifeboats in the coming hyperinflationary storm. We have spent an exhaustive amount of time cross-referencing foreclosure rates, state pension fund solvency reports, agricultural output data, and the out-of-control cost of living indices to build the definitive survival map for your financial future. This is not speculation. This is the cold, hard data pointing to exactly where the next chapter of American existence will be written. And if you do not have a plan to be in one of these 9 locations, the economic hurricane will leave you with nothing. The engine of this collapse is no longer a distant rumble. It is a deafening roar in the financial statements of every major retailer, and the layoff announcements from corporations that were once considered untouchable. We are talking about a systemic implosion where the Federal Reserve's war on inflation has already failed. Commercial real estate is a $1.5 trillion ticking time bomb, and credit card debt in this country has just passed an unthinkable record of $1.14 trillion. Anyone who remembers the 2008 meltdown knows what it feels like when the banks freeze lending overnight. That was a minor tremor compared to the earthquake currently building. According to a recent report from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, serious credit card delinquencies are spiking at rates not seen since the absolute depths of the 2008 financial crisis. And we are still in the very early innings of this downturn. The cost of shelter, food, and energy has created a cost of living crisis where the average American household is now paying over $100 more per month just to maintain the same standard of living they had 3 years ago. As documented by Moody's Analytics, this is the mechanism that is forcing this migration. The middle class isn't moving for better weather. They are fleeing state-level tax burdens, runaway housing costs, and local economies that are being hollowed out by a retail apocalypse that has already shuttered thousands of locations. We are seeing entire metropolitan areas become economic dead zones. The kind of places where the silent rows of closed storefronts echo with the footsteps of the few who remain. The data from U-Haul and United Van Lines shows one-way truck rentals and outbound migration rates skyrocketing from states like California, New York, and Illinois. The destination for this fleeing capital and labor is a very specific list of states that will be able to withstand the insolvency of the federal government and the breakdown of national supply chains. But before we move on, we humbly ask you to support our work with a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our upcoming lists on the specific industries shutting down in your region right now. Without further ado, here are the 9 states that will survive the total economic collapse. Counting down from 9 to the ultimate safe haven at number 1. Number 9, Maine, the isolated economic fortress. The northeastern corner of the country is being completely abandoned by the capital class. But that is precisely what makes Maine a survival zone. While the Boston-Washington corridor drowns in a sea of legacy costs, unfunded pension liabilities, and a commercial real estate vacancy crisis that has turned downtowns into ghost towns, Maine sits physically and financially upwind of the carnage. The economic geometry here is what saves you. New York and Massachusetts are experiencing a wealth exodus so severe that their tax bases are collapsing in real time, forcing them to raise taxes on those who remain, creating a death spiral. Maine, with its 1.3 million people and vast, undeveloped territory, does not depend on the skyscraper economy for its sustenance. The state's economy is anchored by agriculture, timber, and a growing network of remote workers who have already disconnected from the commuter rat race. Walk through the potato fields of Aroostook County in late summer, and you can smell the earth and feel the distance from Wall Street. A tangible separation that no amount of derivative trading can erase. The cost of living advantage is staggering when you compare it to the insanity of Boston. We are seeing land in Aroostook County and Piscataquis County still trading between $1,000 and $3,000 per acre. This is a price point that allows a family to own a tangible, productive asset free and clear, without a crippling mortgage that will be impossible to service when the credit markets completely freeze up. The freshwater reserves here with 60 lakes represent a resource that will be more valuable than gold as the water wars in the Southwest intensify, and the Colorado River system continues its terrifying journey toward a dead pool scenario. Maine's brutal winters are not a bug, they are a catastrophic filter. They ensure that when the heating oil runs out in Massachusetts and millions of unprepared urbanites try to flee north, they will be stopped cold by the very environment that a prepared resident uses as a natural barrier against chaos. The northern Maine economy is built on a barter-ready network of local food systems that completely bypass the fragile just-in-time grocery chains that are already buckling under the weight of supply chain disruptions. An honest caution here: the growing season is brutally short, barely 90 to 120 days. Meaning if you don't master root cellaring and greenhouse management before you arrive, you could starve in the first year. Building a heavily insulated, wood-heated, earth-bermed home is not optional. It is your financial survival tool. Those who lived through the ice storm of '98 understand that the grid will betray you when you need it most. And in Maine, you prepare for that reality from day one. The loneliness can be crushing to those not raised in the cold silence. But in an economy where urban density becomes a vector for desperation, that silent forest is the sound of safety. Number 8, Vermont, the bankruptcy-proof sanctuary. FEMA's own data confirms that Vermont experiences fewer natural disasters than any other state in the Union. But what excites our economic research team is the state's unique insulation from the financial disasters that are obliterating the rest of the nation. Vermont has systematically avoided the high-flying, debt-addicted development model that has turned states like Florida and Nevada into a house of cards ready to collapse the moment tourism and new resident inflows stop. The state is not dependent on a single massive industry that is about to be displaced by artificial intelligence or foreign competition. Instead, Vermont possesses a microeconomic resilience that is unmatched. The town meeting tradition isn't just a quaint piece of history. It is a hyper-localized governance structure that will step in the second federal emergency aid programs become insolvent. We are seeing a state where 70% of the land is forest or farmland, meaning the capacity for localized food production is hardwired into the landscape. On an early morning in the Northeast Kingdom, the only sound is the rustle of dairy cows and the creak of a wooden barn door. A quiet that is the antithesis of the shrieking economic panic gripping the rest of the country. While global food conglomerates are posting record-breaking profit margins on the backs of inflation-stricken consumers, Vermont's local food network can operate independently, without the price shocks originating from international shipping choke points. The practical how-to here is to embed yourself in a community-supported agriculture network immediately. Buying a share in a farm that will feed you regardless of what happens to the supermarket chains. The property taxes here are a significant burden and have been a constant source of debate. But the tax pays for a genuine local safety net and infrastructure that doesn't rely on the evaporating federal block grants that are about to vanish. The lack of billboard-lined highways and sprawling strip malls means the local economy hasn't been hollowed out by the retail apocalypse in the way that generic exurban America has been. The collapse of massive chain stores doesn't erase the economic fabric of a state like Vermont, because the state never sold its soul to the big box retailers in the first place. The relatively low housing inflation in rural areas compared to the national average means a resident's total monthly burn rate is manageable on a reduced or barter-based income. A survival metric few analysts look at, but one that will determine who starves and who doesn't. The caution you need to hear is about the demographic decline. Vermont is losing young people, and that hollowing out could make essential services harder to access. The famous Vermont independence can quietly tip into a lack of emergency care if you are hours from a hospital. And the mud season is a genuine logistical monster that swallows vehicles and delays resupply. A seasonal disruption that will magnify if the public road crews run out of fuel. Number 7. Wyoming, the zero income tax bunker. Wyoming is a fortress of solitude for your capital. A state that has defied the trend of weaponizing tax codes against its own citizens. In an era where federal spending is racing toward a $35 trillion national debt crisis that will require either a default or a currency devaluation of historic proportions, Wyoming's tax structure is a financial life vest. There is no state income tax here. What you produce, you keep. This is not a minor perk. As the federal government becomes more desperate to confiscate wealth to pay for the interest on the exploding national debt, hiding in plain sight in a state that refuses to participate in the revenue-sharing schemes of a failing bureaucracy is a fundamental survival strategy. The state has fewer than 600 people living across nearly 100 square miles, giving you a population density of roughly 6 people per square mile. This is not just privacy, this is a buffer against the resource competition that will define the Long Depression. The wind that never stops howling across the high plains is a constant reminder that nature here offers no comfort. Yet that same wind can spin a turbine and keep your freezers running when the grid goes black. When the trucks stop delivering to the Dollar Generals and Walmarts in more populated states. The sheer lack of a desperate, hungry population base in Wyoming makes large-scale looting and civil breakdown mathematically impossible. The energy sector here, despite the politically motivated war on fossil fuels, provides a genuine on-site industrial base. Wyoming sits on a massive wealth of natural resources that will still hold intrinsic value for localized power generation after the national grid becomes unreliable due to cyberattacks and infrastructure decay. Land in the Powder River Basin started at $500 an acre. While we are currently in a land price escalation cycle driven by smart money fleeing the coasts, the entry point is still a revelation compared to the $1 million shacks in San Diego. The concrete step you must take is to acquire a parcel with a proven well, and either an earth-sheltered home or the materials to build one. Surface living in a Wyoming winter without a massive thermal battery is a fast track to hypothermia. The physical cold is absolutely dangerous. A -40 wind chill is a killer. But exposure to a blizzard is a risk you can manage with preparation. Exposure to hyperinflation and a $6 loaf of bread in a dense urban food desert is a certainty you cannot outprepare. The honest caution here is that medical isolation is lethal. A heart attack or a bad fall can turn into a death sentence when the nearest emergency room is 2 hours away, and a snowstorm has closed the roads. This is a state where you must be your own first responder. And if you are not physically capable of that, the economic shelter comes with a side of physical peril. Number 6. Montana, the redoubt's financial backstop. Montana is the economic anchor of the American redoubt, a region that was identified years ago by survival strategists as the optimal post-collapse zone. Not just because of the mountains, but because of the financial migration that has already hardwired a parallel economy here. The prepper migration to Montana has been underway for 3 decades. An influx of human capital and tangible wealth that has flown directly under the radar of the mainstream financial press. These are not off-grid dreamers, they are engineers, doctors, and small business owners who saw the economic indicators trending toward a depression long before the Consumer Confidence Index collapsed. They have brought with them a massive transfer of wealth from the dying cities to the Intermountain West, establishing local supply chains for agricultural equipment, renewable energy systems, and barter networks that exist completely outside the banking system. The collapse of the national commercial real estate market, with office buildings in San Francisco selling for 70% losses, does not register in the Bitterroot Valley because the local economy wasn't built on speculative loans and zero-interest rate fraud. The water security fed by the Missouri and Columbia River systems eliminates the single greatest economic threat facing the entire Southwest. A permanent drought that is already pricing water out of reach for agricultural operations and creating a slow-motion collapse of the entire regional housing market. We are watching California money flood into Bozeman and driving up prices, but that is a surface-level phenomenon. The serious economic refuge is in the Bitterroot and the Judith Basin, where a working family can still acquire a productive homestead before the coming reset makes land ownership globally impossible for the middle class. The how to here is to secure water rights immediately and invest in a gravity-fed irrigation system. Because in the semi-arid West, land without water is just a liability. The smell of pine sap and the sight of elk grazing at dawn is the visual currency of a life disconnected from the Federal Reserve's printing press. The isolation here is an economic moat. The failure of the just-in-time trucking network to reach remote areas during the last major weather events was a preview of how quickly the Great Plains grocery stores will be stripped bare. But a caution is necessary. The wildfire risk has escalated to a level that can wipe out decades of homesteading labor in a single afternoon. And the cultural friction between old-timers and asset-rich newcomers is a tension that could ignite in unpredictable ways when real hardship arrives. Number 5. Utah, the supply chain sanctuary. Utah operates on a completely separate economic plane from the rest of the Union. Possessing a built-in, fully funded welfare and food storage system that is primed to absorb a shock that would cause a famine in other states. The financial implications of the LDS Church's year supply doctrine are staggering when viewed through the lens of a collapsing national supply chain. When the shelves at Kroger and Costco finally go empty due to a transportation strike, a diesel shortage, or a cyberattack on the payment processing system, a significant portion of Utah's 2 million residents will simply walk down to their basement storerooms and open a can. This means the entire state bypasses the initial panic buying and food riots that will shatter the social order in Los Angeles and Chicago. The vast network of church-owned farms, canneries, and storehouses is an operational independent food distribution network. It is a parallel supply chain that does not need the national trucking grid to function. From a macroeconomic standpoint, Utah has effectively hedged against the single point of failure that is the national food chain. The dry, clean air and the orderly grid of Salt Lake City are a living monument to a society that builds redundancy into its systems. A stark contrast to the chaotic fragility of the coastal metropolises. The Granite Mountain Records Vault is a hardened data fortress that protects crucial knowledge. But more importantly, the ward system acts as a decentralized community banking and mutual aid network. In a depression where the too-big-to-fail banks impose bail-ins or capital controls, Utah's localist culture can facilitate trade and credit without the need for crashing digital ledgers. The practical how-to here is not just to store food yourself, but to build relationships within these networks. Even if you are not a member of the faith, the broader prepping culture has a spillover effect that makes bulk purchasing and knowledge sharing frictionless. The dry climate and the stress on the Great Salt Lake are the long-term headwinds. But the social infrastructure here is essentially a pre-installed survival operating system. While the Federal Reserve continues to debase the currency, Utahns have been storing their wealth in tangible calories and community bonds. An inflation-resistant portfolio that no financial advisor on Wall Street is smart enough to recommend. The caution we must give is that the drying lake is not just an environmental story, it is an economic time bomb. The exposed lake bed is loaded with heavy metals that will create toxic dust storms, threatening the very agricultural yields that make this a sanctuary. Number 4. Missouri Ozarks, the zero-regulation economic-free zone. In the Missouri Ozarks, the regulatory state has effectively been voted out of existence, creating a legal environment where you can build a post-collapse homestead with total freedom from permitting frictions, excessive taxation, and bureaucratic oversight. This is not anarchy, this is a deliberate economic strategy. When a county eliminates zoning codes and building permits, the cost to set up a resilient household drops by tens of thousands of dollars. You do not have to beg a panel of bureaucrats for permission to install an off-grid solar array or build an outbuilding to house livestock. Unlike the tyrannical HOA enforcement in the suburbs, or the regulatory nightmares of states that criminalize rainwater collection, the Ozarks treat your land as your sovereign economic engine. The initial capital outlay required to create a self-sufficient life here is historically low, with viable land still trading between $1, $500 and $4, $0 an acre. This is a price point that allows a family to exit the debt matrix completely. The geography of the Mark Twain National Forest provides a constant supply of timber and game. But it is the 6.0 caves that offer a unique economic advantage. Natural temperature-stable cold storage and shelter that requires no electricity. Walk into one of these limestone caverns on a July afternoon, and the temperature drops to a constant 55 degrees. A free, geology-powered refrigeration system that will extend your harvest through a depression winter. As food spoilage becomes a life-threatening equation in a grid-down scenario, a natural root cellar and secure shelter provided by geology saves untold thousands in construction costs and energy consumption. The concrete how-to here is to learn cave safety and mapping before you ever step foot underground, and to design your homestead proximity to a cave entrance for daily access, treating the earth itself as your economic backstop. The methamphetamine crisis in certain areas is a symptom of rural economic depression that has been weaponized by the pharmaceutical industry. So vetting the specific county and immediate neighbors is a critical part of your due diligence. The tornado risk is a physical reality, but the financial risk of staying in a city where an unpayable mortgage or a job layoff is a certainty is far greater. The collapse of the mainstream job market in the Ozarks is irrelevant if you arrive with a remote income stream or a retirement account converted into hard assets. An honest caution, the ticks and the chiggers and the copperheads are more than an annoyance. They can put you out of commission for weeks during the prime growing months if you are not intensely vigilant and medically prepared. Number 3, Arkansas Ozarks, the multi-generational self-reliance economy. Arkansas takes the survival culture and multiplies it into a regional inheritance, creating an economic buffer zone where the population doesn't freak out when the stock market crashes, because half of them weren't fully participating in the casino economy to begin with. Approximately 50% of the population in the Arkansas Ozarks retains a survivalist or deep self-sufficiency mindset. This is a cultural capital that cannot be downloaded from the internet. It is a living library of knowledge on how to garden, can, hunt, and barter that has been passed down through generations. When the credit card system fails and the freight lines stop, the rest of the country will be forced to learn basic survival skills from YouTube. While their phones are dying, the Ozarks will simply carry on with a centuries-old routine. The growing season exceeding 200 days gives Arkansas a massive advantage over the northern safe havens. Caloric intake and dietary diversity are direct functions of the season length. Maine and Vermont have a brutally short 90-day window to produce the year's food. A cold snap, a crop disease, or a supply chain failure for greenhouse materials in those northern states means starvation. Arkansas can produce multiple harvests, can store massive surpluses, and pivot if a primary crop fails, creating a food security system that is diversified by time itself. The smell of fresh turned soil and the drone of cicadas in June are the soundtrack of an economy that grows value out of the ground, not out of a central bank's digital ledger. The limestone geology with its springs and creeks provides a water resilience that the dry farming regions out west can only dream of. The land prices between $1, $0, and $3, $500 an acre near the Buffalo River, represent a value that the market has irrationally undervalued relative to the zone's safety profile. The practical how-to is to double crop and to master lacto-fermentation. 2 growing cycles and a pantry of fermented vegetables ensure you ride out any supply chain collapse with a full stomach. The heat and humidity are an adjustment, but dehydration and heat stress are conditions you can mitigate with infrastructure and acclimatization. Hyperinflation and a frozen banking account in a northern city are conditions you cannot survive, period. The caution that must accompany this paradise is that poverty here is deeply entrenched and the local job market is practically non-existent. If your remote income stream falters, you could be trapped in a low-cost prison with no escape capital, which is a risk that many ignore until it is too late. Number 2, Tennessee, the optimized fiscal equilibrium. Tennessee represents the ultimate hedge, a state that has optimized for every single economic metric that will matter in the next decade, without going to the extreme isolation that makes logistics for a family impossible. This is where the macro data screams safety. The state has no income tax, placing it in a unique category of jurisdictions that are attractive to remote workers fleeing the hellacious tax regimes of New York and California. The Freedom to Farm Act legally hardens your right to operate a homestead against future municipal interference. A piece of legislation far more valuable than a stack of gold coins in a world where local governments are becoming increasingly aggressive in their search for revenue through code enforcement fines. The climate provides 4 distinct seasons with a 200-plus day growing season, perfectly balanced. It is cold enough to naturally refrigerate crops and break pest cycles, but warm enough to produce abundant corn, soy, and vegetable yields. The rolling hills and the Cumberland River's gentle bends are the sort of landscape that lets you see a predator coming from a mile away. A physical clarity that mirrors the economic clarity of the state's tax policy. The Tennessee and Cumberland rivers provide a freshwater wedge that makes the Colorado River Compact states look like a suicide pact. We have analyzed the target maps, and Tennessee lacks the high-priority strategic nuclear targets that would attract a direct strike, but still possesses the infrastructure and supply chain linkages that allow a person to realistically buy supplies today to prepare for tomorrow. The Cumberland Plateau, towns like Crossville and Cookville, offers land from $3.00 to $6.00 an acre. A price range that is still accessible for a middle-class family liquidating a suburban home. The how-to here is to leverage the Freedom to Farm Act to run a diversified small-scale livestock and market garden operation that can pay its own way within the booming locavore economy. You can build a business that thrives precisely because the national food system is falling apart. The explosion of Nashville is a concern, a speculative bubble that is turning into a traffic-choked metroplex. But the plateau and the eastern mountains are sufficiently rugged and remote to remain neutral ground. The influx of corporate cash into the Nashville music and healthcare sectors is a risk, as it brings the same kind of fragile, bubble-dependent wealth that we are trying to escape. The honest caution is that the suburban sprawl from that bubble could eventually absorb your rural haven, turning your self-sufficient farm into a cul-de-sac with an HOA that views your chickens as a legal violation. So you must buy land with permanent conservation easements or in counties with no zoning at all. The financial calculus here is total self-ownership. You own the land, you keep your paycheck, you grow your food. And you don't fund the very bureaucratic machinery that is impoverishing everyone else. Number 1. Idaho, the epicenter of the parallel American economy. Idaho stands as the undisputed capital of the American Redoubt, a verified, funded, and operational survival economy that has already been stress-tested by the massive waves of capital flight from the collapsing West Coast. For over a decade and a half, the most prescient economic survivors in the country have been liquidating their assets in liberal metro zones and converting that capital into Idaho land. Local businesses and mutual aid networks. This isn't a theoretical community. It is the densest concentration of self-sufficiency practitioners in America. A parallel economy operating within the shell of the old one. The macro reason Idaho wins is because of the network effect. When you move to Idaho, you are not a lone wolf. You are plugging into an existing supply chain of cattle ranchers, seed suppliers, gunsmiths, and construction experts who are ideologically committed to a decentralized economic model. Stand in the Palouse during harvest and you can see wheat that will feed a region. Grown on soil that has never known the poison of a commercial real estate derivative. When the FDIC starts handling the massive regional bank failures that are already on the horizon, the local economy in the Redoubt can continue to function on cash, barter, and private credit without a full-scale seizure. The legal framework, constitutional carry, and explicit Second Amendment sanctuary status ensures that during a breakdown of the policing apparatus, the defense of your economic resources remains in your own hands. This certainty is worth the price of admission because in a depression, property rights not backed by force are just hypothetical concepts. The Snake and Salmon River systems provide hydroelectric and agricultural water security, while the volcanic soil of the Idaho batholith creates an agricultural yield that turns a small 10-acre plot into a genuine commercial caliber food source. The practical how-to in Idaho is to integrate into an established prepper network immediately, trading labor for mentorship on underground greenhouse construction and year-round cold frame production. Because the elevation and the latitude will test your growing skills like no other state on this list. The window is absolutely closing on northern Idaho. The Panhandle, counties like Bonner and Boundary, has seen land prices rise from $5.00 to $15.00 $0 an acre as a tsunami of California equity refugees floods the market. This is the financial red zone. The money is fleeing the progressive dystopia for a reason, and that reason is accelerating. The capital required to enter the Idaho safe zone is rising daily. And while the central regions still offer entry points, the premium is the cost of a proven escape route. The caution we must deliver is that with this influx of ideologically driven capital, the area has become a cultural flashpoint. Any perception of outside interference can trigger reactions that are as rapid as they are severe. And navigating that social terrain requires a level of commitment and discretion that not every economic refugee is prepared to handle. The American Redoubt is where the successor economy to the failed American empire will be built. And Idaho is its undisputed headquarters. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The 9 states we have outlined are the only fire breaks between your family and the financial firestorm that has already consumed the purchasing power of the dollar and is currently burning through the stability of the eastern seaboard and the western blue states. The broader implication here is terrifying in its simplicity. The global and national supply chains are optimized for a world of peace and cheap energy that no longer exists. The economic policies being pursued by the administration and the Federal Reserve Chair are explicitly inflationary, designed to inflate away the federal debt, and in doing so, they will systematically destroy the retirement accounts and living standards of anyone holding only digital currency and paper assets. The only countermeasure is a geography of self-sufficiency, a place where the land itself produces value that the printing press cannot debase. Restaurants are some of the businesses that face the hardest times during economic recessions. And we are already seeing chains like Red Lobster and major franchise operators file for bankruptcy as the consumer discretionary dollar completely evaporates. As these corporate entities shatter and the jobs disappear, the migration from the service economy wastelands to the self-reliant states will become a flood of refugee proportions. You can almost hear the silence of the empty malls and the hum of the moving trucks. A soundtrack that will define this decade. Things are only going to get worse from here. The cost of staying in a failing state will be counted not just in lost dollars, but in lost freedom and lost years. Can you feel the moment bearing down? The collapse won't send you a calendar invite. It will just be a Wednesday morning when the cards don't work and the shelves stay empty. When the familiar hum of the 18-wheeler on the interstate is replaced by an eerie silence, and the only sound is your own breathing in a house you can no longer afford. The data we have presented shows you exactly where the economic and social fabric of this nation will fray last. The choice to relocate is the single most important financial decision you will face. Thank you for watching.